Hi, thanks so much for booking a call. I'm really looking forward to the opportunity to help you. On the call, it's going to be 100% about you. You're going to have the opportunity to share your story, and I'm going to give you my undivided attention to see how I might be able to help. But in this video, I wanted the chance to share a bit about my story so you'd have a better idea of who you're going to be talking with. And there's lots of ways you can focus a story, but this story is going to focus on how I developed self-worth. Because although I know that it seems like the problem in your life right now is all the crazy stuff that's going on, but for most people, the underlying issue, or at least a strong contributing factor, is a lack of self-worth. Now, not only have I experienced this myself, as I'm going to share with you, but I've seen it in just about every client I've worked with. I would say there's actually an epidemic of low self-worth. You'd be amazed. I have clients who are brilliant and beautiful, talented and accomplished. Yet when I ask them to rank their self-worth on a scale of 0 to 100%, they give me some ridiculously low number like 12% or 3% or something like that. Now, I understand this because I've been there myself. That used to be me. Now, I came into this world with a good start. I grew up in California and I had really loving and supportive parents. Excuse me. And I now know that is a tremendous gift. That is not something that everyone has. It's not something that most of my clients have. And that is a strong contributing factor to low self-worth. However, I came by low self-worth in a way you'd probably least expect. School came really naturally to me. And as a kid, I really loved learning and it was really fun. And I really enjoyed the praise I received from my parents and teachers for doing well and having good grades. And that was all great in elementary school and even into middle school. But in high school, it became kind of warped. I began to equate worth with being intelligent and extra talented and all that kind of thing. And my self-worth was dependent solely on how well I measured up to those around me. Now, part of that might have been a little bit of a defense mechanism because I could, at this time in high school, I could compete in that area. But as much as I wanted to be, I definitely wasn't one of the cool kids. And, I was that skinny, goody two-shoes, really studious kid who played classical piano and liked listening to classical music. So, I definitely wasn't one of the cool kids, but I had a group of friends who were kind of like me, only the boys in that crowd, they weren't interested in me. They were all interested in my best friend. And I sort of thought this was because she was smarter than I was, she was more talented, she was prettier. In retrospect, I think it was probably more because she actually had something I didn't have, which was a really healthy sense of self-confidence. But regardless of the reason, the boys in our crowd swarmed to her like bees to flowers, and I felt invisible. So I put all of my energy in high school in getting into college, and not just any college. I really felt I had to get into an Ivy League college in order to prove my worth. See, I had this kind of really skewed view of worth. And I kind of drove myself a little insane. At age 15, I developed insomnia, which got progressively worse. And I had kind of a borderline eating disorder. And I just put way more stress on myself than any high schooler should. But I did get my wish, and I got into Yale, and it was an incredible experience. Even to this day, probably some of the most fun, exciting years I've had. But there was one huge thing that kind of cast a dark cloud over the whole experience, and that was my skewed view of worth. Remember, I viewed worth as being extra special and talented and smart, and my own worth was all about how I measured up to those around me. Well, once I got to Yale, I was surrounded by people who seemed to outshine me in every way. And as I went along, I began to feel like the most worthless person in the entire school. And I did fine. I graduated with honors. I could hold my own, but I really believed that the admissions committee had made some kind of horrible mistake when they let me in. I just didn't feel I deserved to be there. So the good thing, though, when I was there, I'm making it sound kind of dire, it was a great experience, and I did have some really wonderful friends. And in that group of friends, I finally, at the end of sophomore year, had my first real boyfriend, who later became my first husband. Now, during our dating in college, there were all kinds of red flags, like all kinds of them. But I was so happy to just have a boyfriend that I just let them go. I don't worry about them. But when he asked me to marry him, there's this little voice in my head that thought, is this really the person you want to spend your rest of your life with? But here's why I said yes. Even though I was only 22 years old, I was convinced that this could be my very last opportunity at a marriage proposal. And I was so worried about going into that big world alone and the possibility of staying alone for the rest of my life. I thought I'd better take this proposal while I had the chance. So I said yes. And a couple months after we were married, we moved to Charlottesville, Virginia, so that my then husband could start graduate school at UVA. Now, Charlottesville is like the most adorable town ever. And to this day, it's probably my favorite place I've ever lived. It's a really great place. But when we first moved there, I didn't know anybody. And I quickly figured out that one of the reasons my then husband and I were as happy as we were in college was because we were surrounded by all these cool, fun people. But when it was just us, it wasn't that fun. In college, I had studied psychology and I also studied music. And when we got to Charlottesville, I thought I'd try my hand as a music teacher. And that first Christmas time we were there, one of my little students had the honor of playing Tiny Tim in a professional production of A Christmas Carol. And I just thought that was so cool. And I was really excited to go see him. And I proposed this to my then husband and showed him the dates. But he just, without even looking at a calendar, he just said, I can't go. I have to study every night. And I was like, every night? This is like Friday or Saturday or Sunday that I'm asking you to go. I'm not asking you to go on a Tuesday. But he would not be convinced otherwise. So again, we just moved there. I didn't really know people. So I just went by myself. And when I came home, I asked him, I was like, so how'd the studying go? Did you get a lot done? He said, no, I didn't get anything done. And I don't know what he did during those 3 to 4 hours that he could have been having a really lovely evening with his new wife. But that little scene kind of sums up our marriage. He didn't do anything terrible. He wasn't abusive, he wasn't unfaithful, he wasn't a drunk, he wasn't an addict. He was a good person. He was a hard worker. He was a good person and he tried hard in some ways. But there was always something missing. Now, we didn't just give up. We each got our own therapist and we went to couples counseling together and we really, really worked hard on the marriage. But at the end of 5 years, we still weren't that happy. And I mean, we were so young. We were just in our 20s and I felt really old. I felt older then in that way than I feel now, decades later. So I decided if I was going to be that lonely in the marriage, I'd rather just be lonely alone. So we parted ways. And it was really hard. And talk about lonely. That was the most lonely time of my entire life. My family was 3,000 miles away. And honestly, they really weren't that supportive. they thought I'd made some horrible mistake, and that made me question my decision. And because I was so unhappy, I was so lonely and miserable and felt bad and thought, gosh, maybe I made a horrible mistake. But I got through it. And on the other end, I met this amazing man, my husband, Jeff. And in retrospect, getting divorced turned out to be one of the best decisions I ever made in my whole life. And I also see it as a first kind of step towards self-worth. Something inside me knew that I deserved better, that there was something out there better, and that I would be able to attract eventually, at some point, what I wanted. So that, even though it was difficult and hard, it was sort of a venture into self-worth. Now, after Jeff and I dated for a couple years, we moved to Northern Virginia, where I got a full-time music teaching position in the Fairfax County Public Schools. So we were there for 4 years, and during those 4 years, I taught in 3 different schools, because the first 2 schools were pretty horrible experiences. Even though I worked hard and the kids loved me, we had a great time, and the teachers really appreciated me because their kids love going to music, and when they dropped the kids off at music, then they got a break. I was bullied by both of those principals. Now, I wasn't alone. Those 2 women were known bullies, but not everyone in the school got bullied. It was just a small handful of us that got bullied. I mean, they weren't very nice to anybody, but there was a small select group of us that actually really got harassed and bullied, and it wasn't good. And at the time, I had no idea why. I mean, I didn't think I was doing anything wrong. But finally, what was good is that Fairfax County had like over 200 elementary schools, and I was able each year to transfer out of these really horrible situations and finally move myself into a pretty decent school with a really nice woman as a principal. However, this was the era of No Child Left Behind, and Fairfax County was obsessed with standardized test scores. That's all we ever talked about at meetings. And we seemed to have a lot of meetings. And it didn't even really apply to me because music didn't have any standardized tests, but I still had to listen to what all the class teachers had to go through. And I remember one meeting in particular stands out. The nice principal was telling them some strategy or other they had to do. I don't even know what it was. I probably tuned out. But what got my attention was this. She said, even though, and I quote, I remember this word for word, even though we know that this goes against everything we know is good for kids, we have to do it anyway. And I thought, no, we don't. I'm pretty young and I've got a lot of years left in my career, and I am not going to devote myself to something that I know is bad for kids. I mean, it's one thing if we think it's good and it turns out to be bad, that happens. But not knowingly do things that we know aren't good. So I began researching alternative education, and I found that I fell in love with the Waldorf teaching philosophy. And I decided that that's what I wanted to do, that was a really worthy place to put my energy. So the main teacher training area, teacher training school, was in Fair Oaks, California. And both Jeff and I had grown up on the West Coast, and we wanted to get back there eventually. So we figured this was just as good of an opportunity as any. So we packed up our car, and we put our 2 dogs in, and we packed up our house and shipped all our stuff and drove across the country with just so much hope and promise. And one of the unique things about Waldorf education is that the class teacher, ideally, in an ideal world, stays with the same group of kids for 8 years. So if you take a job as a first grade teacher, it's kind of expected, kind of hoped for, that you will stay with this class until 8th grade. So that's complete the 8-year journey. So after graduating from my teacher training program, I was offered a first grade teaching position at this sweet, adorable little school, not so far away from the teacher training program. Now, I love this school. I still love this school. It's just such a sweet school, and I loved my kids in the class, and I'm still in touch with them. They're all grown up now. They're all taller than me and off doing their different things, but they're amazing kids, and I love their parents. I'm still in touch with a lot of their parents, and I love the philosophy of the education, and I love the community, and I thought I had the best job in the world, and I had every intention of taking this group of kids all the way through 8th grade. And if you had asked me in 4th grade, I would have said, there's nothing that could stop me from doing that. Well, as I already shared in the webinar, I couldn't have been more wrong. In 5th grade, something just really crazy and unfortunate just happened, and it was just kind of nuts. And in a way, it was like this continuation of the Fairfax County situation, only 100 million times worse, in that the kids adored me, the parents adored me. 3 separate outside evaluators said I was doing a stellar job in my class, and I was doing a good job. I was doing a really good job. But I got on the wrong side of some people who had were in a position to judge me. And it happened really fast, and I just got pushed out. And as I shared in the webinar, I was devastated, humiliated, rejected, cast out, abandoned, betrayed. Betrayed was a big one. I mean, it was awful. Not only had I lost my livelihood, but I lost my sense of purpose. I lost my community. I'd identified myself so long as a teacher. I didn't even know who I was anymore without that title. And my sense of self-worth was at an all-time low. I mean, here I was, somebody who defined worth as accomplishments and achievements. And look where I was. I had no job and no will to look for another one. I knew in my heart this was the last school I was ever going to work in. I mean, I'd had those 2 bad experiences before, and then this one, just devastating, heartbreaking, like there was no way I was going to another school. But I didn't know what else I was going to do. So that was really, really difficult. And then I had no money. I was living on my unemployment, and my husband was in school, and we'd bought a house we couldn't afford in the first place. We'd bought high, and then the real estate bubble crashed, and so we had to foreclose on our house and live with a friend. And gosh, we were so stressed. There was a period where I thought we were going to lose our marriage too. So I remember telling my practitioner at the time that I felt worthless. And what he said was so helpful. He said, "You're not worthless. You're just going through an intense contraction right now. And after periods of contraction, they're generally followed by periods of expansion. Only you might want to work on your definition of worth." So I have been working on that definition. And my working definition right now, it's constantly evolving, but right now what it is so much more inclusive and forgiving than my old one, which only allowed 3% of the population to be worthy. This one is so inclusive. Everybody who incarnates to this planet is inherently worthy. They're an inherently worthy being on a soul journey of growth and expansion. Now, if that sounds kind of crazy to you and you're rolling your eyes and you're like, yeah, whatever, think of your children. Whenever I ask my clients who have really low self-worth if their children are worthy, their whole expression changes. And they immediately say, yes, of course, yes, my children, they're 100% worthy. they're able to see the love and the kindness and the goodness and the talents and the gifts and all that their children bring in a way they can't see that for themselves. So what I want to propose is that the way these people see their children, and probably if you have children, the way you see your own children, is the way that God or the universe or spirit or whatever word you put in for that power greater than ourselves, that's how this infinite power sees every being. They see every being as inherently worthy on a soul journey of growth and expansion. Now, this journey, this soul journey can look a little crazy sometimes. I know that my journey looked really crazy about a decade ago. And your journey is probably looking a little crazy right now, which is why you're listening to me on this video. So because of this, I have learned not to judge anybody else's journey. Their journey is between them and the universe. However, there are also choices that we make along this journey. And if the choices that someone is making is hurting you in some way, then they might not be trustworthy. They might be worthy human beings because all beings are inherently worthy, but they are not worthy of your trust. And if that is the case, then you have every right, and actually are even encouraged, to create healthy boundaries between you and the person who is untrustworthy. So by this definition, this twofold definition, one, all beings are inherently worthy, and two, that there's kind of a second layer made by the choices that you make on your journey that allow you to become trustworthy. That is, if you're really living in integrity and you're honest and you're striving every day to be the best version of yourself you can, and you're trying to grow and live your purpose, that is trustworthy. By that definition, I get to be 100% worthy. Not only do I get to be 100% worthy, but you get to be 100% worthy, and all of my clients get to be 100% worthy, and everyone that I allow in my life is 100% worthy. What a relief. That changes everything. It changed the way I see myself, it changed the way I see others, and it changed the way I see every experience that didn't go the way I wanted or expected it to go. So there, of course, have been lots of those experiences, but I talked about 3 of them today. So let's look at those 3 jobs where I did a great job, but I was bullied by these people, and the third one got really pushed out and devastated. I now see those 3 experiences actually as mirrors of my own consciousness. I mean, think about it. For decades before then, I had been constantly telling myself, you're not good enough. You're not as good as that person. You're not measuring up. You're not doing this right. You're not this, you're not that. You're not good enough. You're not enough. And guess what? I got 3 people that were in a position to judge me, to play out that role that was in my head. So I actually manifested them in my life. Well, great. So that job that I was so devastated at having lost, I was so angry about that for so long, so angry, so hurt. Now, years later, I see it as actually perfect and in complete divine order. Because you know what? I needed a wake-up call. I needed a wake-up call to claim my own worth and step into my own power and move into the life that I came here to live. And I couldn't do that with this voice in my head constantly judging myself. So I needed it to be pointed out that this is what was happening. The first time wasn't that bad. The second time was a little worse. I didn't get it those first 2 times. I needed a big one. I needed that cosmic 2x4, and that's what that was. So isn't it kind of ironic that the very thing I thought would bring me self-worth, the very thing I thought would solve this problem, fill this hole of the lack of self-worth for the rest of my life, that is getting into Yale. I was convinced as a high schooler, I mean, I didn't put it in this way, but in my mind, I thought, gosh, if I could get into Yale, then I know I'd be worthy and I wouldn't ever have to question it again. That thing actually exacerbated my self-worth because of the perspective I had. Whereas two things that seemed to be bad, getting the divorce and losing the job that I cared so much about, those two things were actually the things that allowed me, the divorce allowed me to take a step into self-worth, and then losing that job where I just lost everything, that's where I really had to dig deep and claim that worth within myself, not judging on what was going on outside of myself, not comparing myself to anybody else, but just claiming that and claiming that I was an inherently worthy being on a journey, learning. And I learned the lesson. I believe I learned the lessons I was supposed to learn. So I don't have any regrets about that. So one thing I didn't share that much on the webinar about how I really help clients is I think one of the biggest things I help clients do is claim their self-worth. I hold a place of such high worth for everybody I work with, and they're able, in that space, they're able to expand into their worth, and they're able to claim it. And once they claim their worth, then everything shifts for them. Work gets easier, relationships flow better, health improves, and generally life becomes more fun. I mean, it's so much more fun when you're not constantly judging yourself and everybody around you and all your experiences is good or bad or whatever, but you're just accepting that everyone's on this journey and everyone's here to learn certain lessons, and whatever you're experiencing right now is probably, if it's difficult, it's probably your greatest teacher. So I am looking so forward to hearing your story and seeing if there's a way that together we can move out of this painful period of contraction and into this beautiful expansion, and see if we can find the lessons that you're supposed to be learning right now, so you can move on and create that life that you're looking forward to. So I so appreciate you listening to this video, and I'm so excited about talking with you, and I will talk to you soon.